Chairman, for purposes of special privilege.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I could just take a moment of personal privilege, a member of this body for longer than I can ever remember, Mayor Tom Rowland, my predecessor as mayor in Cleveland, and my predecessor as a member and vice chairman of TACIR. The family has indicated to me that he has taken a turn for the worse in his health. And I asked permission today if before we begin TACIR, we could just pause for a moment of reflection and remembrance of this great civil servant who needs our thoughts and prayers right now. Amen. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're quiet. There we go. You're quite welcome, Mr. Vice Chairman. I call your attention, members, to the minutes of the December 21 meeting. Chair to entertain a motion that we receive. They're so noted. Is there a second? There is. Without objection, we will take a voice vote on it. Those in favor of receiving the minutes say aye. Those opposed, nay. Carries. At this time, I will defer and turn the program over to Dr. Lippard, who will give the commission and staff update.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First commission update is a brief update on the education funding review that Governor Lieu has initiated. As you recall, I gave you a brief update on that last meeting. Since then, the Basic Education Review Committee, the BEPRC's chairman, Lillian Hartgrove, acting at the request of that committee's members, wrote the governor requesting an opportunity to hear from the administration about the review, any early findings or conclusions, and the priorities of the administration for a new funding formula. The letter also expressed the desire of the members of the BEPRC to share their thoughts and concerns about education funding in Tennessee. Commissioner Penny Schwind, the Commissioner of the Department of Education, responded on behalf of the governor and declined the committee's request, noting that the administration considers the new process independent of the current BEP formula, and also noted that 9 members of the BEPRC already participate in either a funding review subcommittee or the steering committee, and all of the State Board of Education members also sit on a subcommittee. The commissioner also said that she meets regularly with the chair and vice chair of the State Board of Education, who sit on both the BEP committee as well as school funding subcommittees, and therefore have regular access to real-time information as needed. So just a process update for you. The next commission update is a request from Senator Lundberg for a new commission study. If it's okay with the senator and with the chair, I'll go ahead and give the staff update first and then return to that. And we just have one staff update, and you all recall Emma Johnson, who was a full-time staff member for a number of years with us here at TACIR, and then continued on with us in a part-time capacity, has actually now left our part-time roster to accept a full-time position with the state of Texas at the Texas Legislative Council. Our loss is their gain. Yeah, just like we keep giving it to Texas. I know. Of course, we appreciate all that Emma's done for the commission and the state of Tennessee, and wish her well in her new endeavor. With that, Senator Lundberg.
Thank you, Mr. Lippard, and I'll defer now to and recognize Senator Lundberg for purposes of making a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The usual way is most of us know for studies to come before us is through the legislature through a bill. Frankly, there was one I'd like to conduct, and I could run a bill. It's not controversial, but I thought it'd frankly be easier to put it before the body. And it's about tangible personal property tax. It is a tax businesses pay. And I'll give you a personal example. As a business owner, we go out and buy various pieces of hardware for our company. We pay taxes on that. But then every year, we have to do a schedule and pay tangible TPP on that again and again. It's a local government funding revenue stream. It's not as big as some may think. Even for small businesses, those taxes are $10 to $25. And administratively, I've heard from a number of folks that it's a fairly large burden to do that. So I'd like TACIR to take a look at that. And specifically, there's a few things that I'd like to ask. Number one, cost to businesses large and small to file and pay the tax and compliance levels. Variances among local governments, large and small, as to the percent of the tax collected and overall revenue basis. Cost to local government, large and small, to collect delinquent payments. Possible revenue replacement models that would be fair and equitable to businesses, taxes, large and small, to local governments. And recommended actions on elimination and/or reductions in the TPP in the burden on businesses. Should we phase it out one at a time, incrementally? It's not controversial. In fact, talking about the study, there's a number of folks who have jumped out in support of this from, and I have a list somewhere, and I'm searching for it. So let's see, NFIB, the Tennessee Chamber of Commerce, the Association of Assessing Officers, County Officials Association, County Mayors Association, County Commissioners Association, TML, and I haven't frankly had anyone who disagrees with it. Procedurally, and Chairman and Cliff, if you'd correct me, if we do this here on a vote, we can do it. I need, frankly, 17 votes to get it through, and I believe we have 16 in attendance and 2 on the phone. We have 18 in attendance. So if possible, I would like to make a motion that TACIR undertake, and I did ask Cliff some weeks ago if this was in the wheelhouse of what TACIR was, and not taking words from you, but you said absolutely it is, and that we could have it probably in September. So with that, I would like to make a motion that TACIR undertake this study, Mr. Chairman.
All right, I hear multiple seconds. Second, okay. The motion properly made and second. And as any questions or discussion? All right, I will take a voice vote unless there's objection. Those in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Carries.
Thank you, Will.
If I can call the members' attention to the third item on our calendar today, the Tennessee Valley Authority of Payments in lieu of taxes, the annual report for our approval. Mr. Morio, our research manager, will make that presentation to us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Bob Morio. Today I am presenting for your approval the Commission's annual report on Tennessee Valley Authority's payments in lieu of taxes, commonly referred to as pilots, and the issues affecting those payments and their distribution to the state of Tennessee and its local governments. The report is noted under tab 3 of today's agenda. It's made an annual requirement by Public Chapter 1035 Acts of 2010, and according to Tennessee Code Annotated Section 410.112, the statutory deadline at the end of February. There are no recommended actions to be taken by the General Assembly in this year's report. I'll take just a moment to go over some changes from last year's payments and briefly call your attention to some ongoing issues staff will continue to monitor for the upcoming year. Beginning on page 4 of the report, we report that after last year's substantial decrease, TVA estimates its overall pilot for the current federal fiscal year 2021-22 will be $512 million, an increase of $12 million. That's largely attributed to the recovery of the region's commercial and industrial customers following the previous year's COVID-19 shutdowns. Of this $512 million total, TVA's estimated payment to Tennessee for the federal fiscal year 2021-22 is $345 million, which is an increase of $5.7 million from the previous federal fiscal year. However, for only the second time since federal fiscal year 2008-2009, Tennessee's percentage of the authority's overall payments has decreased, slipping from about 68% to 67.4% of the total pilot, and that is shown in Table 1 on page 5 of the report. And I'll come back to that decrease in just a minute. First, just continuing on page 6 of the report, explains that on the state's fiscal year basis, Tennessee is receiving $4.7 million less in the 2021-22 state fiscal year when compared to state fiscal year 2020-21. The total annual payment amount decrease for the state's fiscal year despite the increase for the federal fiscal year, because the state's fiscal year begins on July 1st, 3 months earlier than the federal fiscal year. So that overlap means that state fiscal year 2021-22 includes distributions from the last 3 months of the previous federal fiscal year, 2020-21, when the pilot was lower. So that offsets the increase for the coming months. The payments to each county and city for state fiscal year 2021 and 22 are detailed in the appendices at the end of the report. Staying on page 6, the report explains that pandemic relief credits in federal fiscal years 2020, 21, and 21, 22 have reduced the amount of revenue TVA would otherwise have earned, in turn reducing the total pilot amount. And we just note that a reduced credit was approved for federal fiscal year 2022 and 23, which will lessen the negative effect of that on the following year's pilot. Turning on to page 12, the report explains that as TVA continues to rebalance its generating fleet, retiring older facilities and building new ones, those resulting changes can cause shifts in the value of power property from state to state and even from county to county, which can affect each state's and county's share of the TVA pilot. And this had been working in Tennessee's favor in recent years, but new investments in 2021 at facilities in Kentucky and Alabama, combined with the depreciating value of the Bull Run plant in Anderson County as it nears its 2023 retirement, has shifted some of the value of TVA's property towards those other two states. And this contributed to Tennessee's decreased share of the overall pilot that I mentioned a moment ago. We're also reporting that TVA has begun evaluating whether to retire its coal-fired plants at Cumberland and Kingston, and decisions regarding where to build replacement units for those could affect Tennessee's share of pilot payments in the future. So staff will be watching for updates on those two properties throughout the year. Next, as was discussed in last year's report, TVA's largest customer, Memphis Light, Gas, and Water, MLGW, continues to assess whether to leave the TVA system. Previously, MLGW had commissioned studies that projected potential savings if it were to leave TVA. We turn to page 18 of this year's report. We note that MLGW has now requested bid proposals so it can determine actual costs of leaving TVA and obtaining its power supply elsewhere. Those proposals are due soon, within the next couple of months, and MLGW intends to make its decision whether to proceed further by the end of 2022. If MLGW chooses to end its contract with TVA, the resulting loss of revenue would reduce the total pilot and Tennessee's share significantly. Because there's a 5-year termination period before MLGW's contract would end, any possible effects on the pilot wouldn't begin until federal fiscal year 2028-2029 under that timeline. Moreover, local governments in the MLGW service area of Shelby County, after it leaves TVA, would no longer receive pilot distributions through the state's allocation formula. That formula is included as Appendix B in the report, and only population, acreage, and land contained within the TVA electrical power service area is used to make those payment calculations. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have at the time, or otherwise thank you and ask for your approval of this report.
If I may, I have a question for you, and I wanted to call back to your attention, Mr. Morial, about the intention of the Tennessee Valley Authority to prepare an environmental impact statement to assess the impacts that may be associated with the retirement of the coal-fired units in Kingston.
Yes.
Is there any way that you can quantify that to let us know the effect on, or is just one coal-fired plant? I think, would that result in a significant effect on the payments, or?
Yeah, TVA doesn't publish individual, like the property value of each individual property. They did give me sort of a state-by-state breakdown. So I've kind of tried to just do some napkin-type guesses, and that share of the state's property value right now, that's about 67 or 68%. If both plants were retired and nothing was replaced, if new plants were built in other states, it would drop, I think, somewhere down in towards 62%. But that's just based on just very rough information they've given me. It's one of the things that when we find out more this coming year as to whether they're going to do those retirements and when that would happen, we'll look into that further.
All right. Well, it's a matter, obviously, since I represent Kingston in that region, it's a great interest to me and my constituents, not to mention others across the state. Director Lippert.
And just to make sure it's clear, that the drop would be in Tennessee's share of the total would drop from 67% to 62%. It's not that the amount would be equal to 62% of what Tennessee currently
Right. That's
receives.
just, and that's
thank you.
of the two halves of what determines the state's share of the pilot. Half of it's from electricity sales, half of it's from the value of property. So the property value side is what's been fluctuating lately, where investments in different areas, different plants in different states, that side goes up and down. The other side of how much electricity of TVA each state purchases seems to be more regular. That doesn't go up and down quite as much if you don't have a big a plant closes all of a sudden. We're still buying the same amount of electricity, just coming from somewhere else.
And I think, help me here. I think that there's a portion of the payment is based on a percentage of the gross power sales, and then there's a fixed payment for the facility within the county.
There are impact payments that
Yes.
direct payments that TVA makes for counties where it has those facilities.
But those impact statements are not covered in this report.
They're
Except I saw it, I think, in a chart, one of your charts. Maybe.
yeah, and in the appendix there's where there's construction projects going on. The other ones there's a direct payments that sort of come off the top of about $3.4 million that those stay. That we do not get a schedule of who gets those and how much those are, because it doesn't go through the state's distribution formula, so it doesn't really fluctuate, or we don't really have any sort of.
All right. Representative Williams.
Thank you. Thank you for your report. Just a clarification on Table 1. It talks about the Tennessee's amount. If what you say happens and these two plants close, we go to 62% in lieu of the current 67%. It looks as if the impact to the state's amount or Tennessee's amount could go down another.
That total wouldn't go down that full amount. This percentage is a combination of two halves of. Half of that comes from the amount of TVA's revenue from sales of electricity, and the other half is from the value of the property. So the property value side goes down, and then the revenue from electricity side stays relatively the same. Then the total share isn't going to fall as much as that. But again, this is
napkin.
yeah, very. I said, please, no one hold me to whether it's 62 or 63%, but just the idea that those two plants do represent a good chunk of the value of property, and if nothing new were built in the state, if they were retired, it would have an effect.
Chairman Hazelwood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just in a sort of a follow-up to that, okay, the portion of this that comes from the property, we've discussed that. You mentioned that the revenue, the electric sales are less elastic, I guess, than the property values. But do we know, does Tennessee share, we're growing in Tennessee, our economics, base is growing. So is Tennessee's share of that power purchase, is that growing, or are other states keeping pace with us in that kind of growth? Is that kind of similar?
Actually, both halves did decrease somewhat this year, slightly, and did not get any sort of specifics from TVA as to what may have caused that. I know a few years ago, there was a report, one of our reports, there was a major industrial customer that left, that stopped buying directly from TVA in Kentucky, I think. That was a big hit on their share of electricity sales. But usually, the sales of electricity don't have large, big swings like that based on, one or two customers. So it could be a number of things. I said I didn't get any answer from TVA, but both sides of the equation did fall a little bit from last year to this year.
If I may ask another question, I believe in this report you indicated that the TVA had started depreciating the Bull Run property.
Yes, it's set to retire at the end of 2023.
Is that depreciation reflected in these?
Yes, that was
Okay.
that was one of the things that they said contributed to that loss of value was that, getting near the end of the retirement for that.
All right. And if you don't mind, if there, in this discussion we're having, if you see any trends or anything, significant information, that should pass, we'd certainly appreciate you bringing it to our attention during the course of the year.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Mayor, you're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Mario, do you have any idea the Ford Motor Company project in West Tennessee is going to use a tremendous amount of electricity? It's coming from TVA. They're going to direct serve that site. It's enormous amount. Any idea, looking down the road, when that site and that manufacturing plant is completed and up and running, what that kind of an investment from TVA, number one, and that kind of usage from Ford Motor Company and SK Innovations is going to do to the numbers in a study like this?
I'll definitely look into it for next year. I think, we might have some examples, in recent years when things like Volkswagen or, when large factories have opened up, we might be able to talk to them about, any of the larger things that have happened in recent years and try to get some information as far as what that might have done for sales.
Okay.
Are there other questions? Thank you very much for a very fine report. We appreciate that information and look forward to hearing perhaps other information as it passes on through your desk. Members, item 4 or tab 4, the annual report on Tennessee's public infrastructure needs. This is the final report, and we will need an approval on this. And I'm going to refer to Mr. Carpenter, Tyler Carpenter, our research manager, for a presentation. And as he comes up here, we do need approval on the TVA in lieu of taxes report. Chair, there's a motion to approve. Is there a second? With a second, there's no objection, we'll take a voice vote. Those in favor of the motion to approve the in lieu of tax payment report, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. There being none, it carries unanimously. And now we'll turn our attention to Mr. Carpenter, who will make a presentation. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. My name is Tyler Carpenter, and today I will present the annual Public Infrastructure Needs Inventory Report for your approval. The report can be found behind tab 4. This year's report is consistent with previous year's reports and follows the same format. However, this year the report is based on the 5-year period from July 2020 to June 2025. I just want to draw your attention to a few points of interest in this year's report. First, if you'll turn your attention to Figure 1 on page 9, you will see the total estimated inflation-adjusted cost per capita of all needed public infrastructure improvements in Tennessee increased for the 6th consecutive year. In Table 1 on page 9, you can see that in this year's inventory, state and local officials report a total need of $61.9 billion, which is about $3.4 billion more than last year. The categories most responsible for the reported increase in total estimated cost are transportation and utilities and education. Public infrastructure needs for transportation and utilities and education accounts for 89.4% of the increase in the inventory. Transportation and utilities is and always has been the largest category of infrastructure in the inventory, based on total estimated cost. This year, the need in this category increased by $2 billion and now totals $35 billion. The education inventory increased by $987 million and now totals $15.2 billion, which is mainly attributable to a $1 billion increase in post-secondary education needs. If you turn to Table 2 on page 14, you will see that technology needs increased by $99 million, or 88% from 2019 to 2020. This significant increase in technology needs in the current year's inventory is in part a response to the COVID-19 pandemic. The next largest increase in infrastructure needs was for the health, safety, and welfare category, which increased by $575 million, primarily because of law enforcement and fire protection needs. Law enforcement infrastructure needs increased by $601 million, almost half of which is attributable to a single project for a multi-agency law enforcement training center in Davidson County. Fire protection infrastructure needs increased by $37 million, which is mostly needed to replace or build 5 new fire stations in Rutherford County. The need for projects that support recreation and cultural assets continues to increase. This year, the estimated cost of recreational projects has increased by $7 million, community development needs increased by $23 million, and libraries, museums, and historic site needs increased by $10 million. The final point of interest I want to highlight is that, as in previous years, just over 2/3 of the needs in the inventory are not funded. However, as projects move forward from the conceptual stage to the planning and design stage, more funding will become available for them. This was all a brief overview of the needs reported in the current inventory report. If you want to see how your county is performing, please look at the county summaries, which start on page 21. Appendix D contains information on project type and stage of development, and Appendix E contains information related to school districts. And before I conclude, I want to briefly talk about COVID-19. As variants of COVID-19 threaten an imminent return to pre-pandemic life, governments continue to take various measures to contain the spread of the virus. The extent to which the pandemic might affect public infrastructure needs in Tennessee communities has been among the many uncertainties stemming from the pandemic. TACIR is currently conducting an analysis to compare and contrast the effects of COVID-19 induced disruptions by using historical trends to determine their effects on public infrastructure development or priorities. And lastly, I would like to update you on the current status of the inventory for the following year, for the coming year. Public infrastructure needs are currently being surveyed by the development districts. And I'd like to thank the development districts for all their hard work in collecting this information. I want to personally thank Presley Powers, who recently joined the infrastructure team, Rabia Chaudhry for training me, Dave Kaiser, who has helped guide me using his own time as I took over this project, and all of the TACIR staff that have been incredibly helpful in the development of the report. Thank you for your time. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, and with that, I seek approval of this year's infrastructure report. So the inventory each year, the development districts, we contract with the development districts to survey the local governments, and As you can see in Table 1, all of the needs fall into one of those categories. And so the development districts reach out to mayors, engineers, city officials to determine what, I believe in many instances, it's capital improvement projects. When we inventory schools, which is included in this map, the school system has certain needs to bring their schools up to a better condition than fair or poor. And so, to answer your question, I would say, in the process of surveying the categories in Table 1, most of the needs reported will fall into those categories. It's so the inventory includes projects that are sent to us by TDOT, by state agencies, and through the surveying of the development district, or the surveying by the development districts of the local governments and schools as well.
Do you know if the development districts are consistent with the officials that they contact to get these estimates across the areas? In other words, if you go into a school system, do they consistently get it from the same level of personnel, or is it just the personnel are recommended by the director of schools? Same way would be in county government. Do you go to the county mayor's office and get that, or do you know if there's any consistency in the folks they talk to?
Yes. So the way that our system is set up, the development districts every year have to refresh their respondent list. And I've only been in this position for 1 year, but I can tell you that each year those respondents do change a little bit, but I think over the long term they're fairly consistent. It is not a certain position across all counties that answers those surveys. Sometimes it's the mayor, sometimes it's the superintendent. It really depends, but they try, I think, to be as consistent as possible. And we do keep track of who they're speaking with, and have a good bit of information on that if you're ever interested.
Thank you. I just note but like in the school system, they're talking to someone within the school system, right? I mean, they wouldn't be talking. It'd be a different figure if they asked me what the school system needs than what they asked the director of school the school system needs. That would be a significantly different figure. Are they consistent?
Right, and I do believe that I think even when the mayor is listed as the respondent, they're collecting those needs from the school system. So.
I'm thinking and looking at this, and with the consideration of the Ford plant that is coming in, and the need for the satellite industries that will be throughout West Tennessee, that there's a lot of problems with the roads in order to get those products to the plant. And I'm just surprised that what Ford is requiring for these satellite industries, and also for education, health care, and all of that West Tennessee, all of West Tennessee actually just seems to be so low in their infrastructure needs. And it's really hard to believe that all the development districts would not put that as more of a priority if that's where that information is coming from in the Department of Transportation.
I can attempt to address that. Well, one thing I would point out is the inventory that we report in report on in here is within a 5-year window. And so some of those needs may not have yet been captured. They may be in the inventory and just not within that window. And it may be something that shows up in the current year that's being surveyed for next year. But you're correct, and I would agree with you that it's probably going to potentially create more needs. But those should be captured when we receive data from TDOT and then the follow-up by the development districts.
I hope TDOT is as concerned as we are about the lack of infrastructure for roads getting, to these different counties to Ford.
And I would be happy to make a note of that and keep track of that as it develops and see how that pans out with the development districts and their surveying.
Thank you. If you'll do that, I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Tyler captured most of what I was going to say, which I think part of that is the timing of the Blue Oval announcement. I suspect we'll see a lot more of needs reported going forward in that region. One other part of that, though, is that these needs are self-reported. The survey collected by the development districts. And one of the things the team does is they meet every year and have training with the surveyors from the development districts to help make sure that we have a standardized approach and that we're as consistent as we can be in collecting that data.
Just a quick comment. Former TDOT Commissioner Bright is working on that project. I think that bodes well for the area and for the transportation needs. And did I understand you say that the numbers have been adjusted for inflation? And if so, how did you go about doing that?
That is correct in Figure 1. When we look back into the past, what we used was as you can see in footnote 9, the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis State and Local Government Consumption Price Index. We set up a mechanism to convert all those numbers throughout the year. We have data back to 2007 for everything that we report in the inventory. So we've run it through that calculation, and that's what we have.
And when did that happen? Because inflation continues to increase, and I just want to make sure that the numbers are realistic based on today's rates.
Yeah. So if you look in Figure 1, the inventory that you were looking at in this report, it's all the needs that existed. I believe it was as of the end of June of last year. And so we're a little delayed when it comes to reflecting any of the inflation that we've seen recently. And if you look, too, in Figure 1, you see the highlighted areas. We've captured some of the 2008, 2009, trying to show you what occurred during inflation or during the recession there. And so in 2020, we're also seeing how things are reacting there. We're not all the way through the 2020 inventory. That'll be reflected in the coming inventory report.
Waiting patiently.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm looking through the inventory of things per county. I see new public schools and additions, post-secondary education. Does the category for post-secondary education, is that capturing those are our public institutions of higher education?
Yes, I believe so.
And so that's our community colleges and our public colleges, right?
Yes.
Okay. Is that looking at the infrastructure of the buildings on the campuses or infrastructure of the roads? What is it capturing?
Primarily I believe primarily the buildings. There is, if you'll allow me to turn to it, we do have a glossary that's attached to the report, and We'll quickly review that. And that's at the very end of the appendix. So examples include the junior colleges, public colleges, universities. What I have seen in the inventory during my time is primarily the buildings themselves that are either being rehabilitated or built brand new. So I imagine that if it's a road, a public road, it would be it would fall under transportation, unless it's owned and managed by the university.
Okay. But the main thing is the inventory of the buildings on the campus, correct?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Just a quick follow-up to that. Previous questioner mentioned secondary schools and community colleges. I'm assuming that also would include our TCATs?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
There being none, then the chair would entertain a motion to approve the annual report on Tennessee public infrastructure. From a motion from proper second. Any further debate? There being none, on a voice vote, those in favor of the motion to approve, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. It carries unanimously. Thank you very much for a very information-filled report. I'll call your attention now, members, as we proceed to tab 5, our final report for approval on House Bill 1593, Senate Bill 1235, State Contracting and African American Owned Business. Mr. Morio, I will refer to you and defer to you for the presentation of the report.
Well, thank you again, Mr. Chairman. Hello again, Commissioners. Remain Bob Morio, and I am pleased to present for your approval the final draft of the Commission's report on state contracting and African American owned businesses, prepared in response to House Bill 1593 by Representative Miller and Senate Bill 1235 by Senator Gilmore in the 112th General Assembly. And the report is located under tab 5 of your docket books. First, call your attention to the one new piece of information added to the final report. It's located on page 19. At our December meeting, Chairman Yeager suggested that staff reach out to the Fiscal Review Committee to see what information they might have related to the contracts that they review. The committee does not review all state contracts. It's only those that are non-competitive, over $250,000 that are going beyond a year. It does not keep a record of how many are awarded to minority-owned businesses, although diversity information is provided to the committee members in the review packets. They tell us that of the roughly 300 contracts the committee reviews each year, they believe an average of 5 or 10 are going to minority or women-owned companies. Notwithstanding this addition and a few usual final draft refinements, the main findings of the report are unchanged from December. Most of the 23 recommendations included in the 2009 Disparity Study have been implemented to some extent. However, none of the 6 race and gender-conscious policy recommendations from the 2009 study were adopted, despite the study's results likely providing legal basis to do so. The state has not updated the disparity analysis from the 2009 study in the decade since its publication, and without a new study, it's not possible to say definitively whether the disparities documented in 2009 for state spending with African American owned businesses still exist. However, some comparisons of available data over the years do show an increase in the total share of procurement funds received by African American owned businesses, although the increase is not evenly distributed across business sectors or among state departments. The 2 recommendations presented in the draft report remain unchanged. First, because the existing data collection and reporting cannot on its own support the type of analysis needed to demonstrate whether racial disparities exist in state contracting, the report recommends that, should the state decide it wants to update the 2009 disparity study, it would benefit from exploring cost-effective ways to enhance its collection of procurement data, to be able to compare state spending with business availability in greater detail and calculate those disparity ratios for different categories of businesses, including but not limited to those owned by African Americans. And second, because many departments are not meeting their aspirational goals for procurement from minority-owned businesses, because information published by the state about agencies' goals isn't separated into those categories, the report recommends that the Governor's Office of Diversity Business Enterprise should report each state department's aspirational goals and achievements for businesses owned by minorities, women, persons with disabilities, and service-disabled veterans, as well as other small businesses. Doing this could help keep interested parties informed of the agency's progress, identify areas where improvements are warranted, and potentially refine the goal-setting process. Information could be added to the GoDBE website and possibly made accessible through the Transparent Tennessee portal. In closing, I'd like to thank the staff at the Governor's Office of Diversity Business Enterprise for their assistance with the study, thank the other procurement officials, and the members of the African American business community who took time to educate us about this important topic. Thank you all as well for your input and your consideration and approval of this final report.
Thank you very much for the presentation of that report. Before we seek a motion for its approval, I wanted to see if any commissioners had questions or comments regarding the contents of this report. Representative, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the report. I want to thank my colleagues, Representative Miller, and I think Representative Camper had something to do with this. I'm not sure which senator had something that was part of this legislation to even get this report done. Was it Senator Gilmore? I want to thank them for that also, and I want to thank this body also for the due diligence that this body always shows. I can't, and to the director and to our committee, I can't say enough of how I honestly think these are the smartest people in the Capitol. Seriously, these guys and women that dig into these reports and dig so deeply into them, and with the amount of detail that is brought back to us. You sure make us look really, really smart. But again, I want to thank you for that. Some of the information contained in this report on a couple of different levels is staggering. Is truly staggering. And I'm going to stop short of beating our state up about this. I just want to see us do better in helping to change generations, and that's what we do have the ability to do that. I always tell people, and I think I said this in the last meeting when we were hearing this, that to allow for others to generate income. And we're talking, these are difference makers, when you get a chance to contract with the state. But it's no threat to any other group. Because America has a lot of money. Believe it or not, as much as we say, there's no money, America has a lot of money. I've been to a bunch of different countries, and trust me, America has a lot of money. And so if we, and I look at it as the pie, right? And if we were able to give or allow, minorities and women to just receive a crumb off the flake of the pie, that's enough to change generations in their households for a lifetime. And a crumb off the flake of the pie is no threat to the individuals that are receiving slices of the pie. And so I would hope that we will, look at this, really look at this, and start moving policy in the direction to be able to raise the quality of life for other people. Now I'm about to get into my raw terms now, y'all. So I want you to think about this. We deal with these crime issues and things across our state, right? And most of the crimes that you hear about in the news, there's an economic benefit of the crime in most cases. There's no economic piece at the end of it. Somebody's trying to do something to get some money. And so, but think about this. If people's quality of life were changed or improved, they wouldn't be trying to kick somebody's back door in to get something out of their homes for financial gain. And so, we have the power, not just the power, but we have the power and the intelligence and the opportunity to ensure that all of our citizens, or the majority of our citizens' quality of life is improved. And we have the information here, right here before us. And I do believe in us, in our state. I believe in my colleagues, that not just that the ones that sit here on TACIR, but throughout the legislature, that we can make people's lives better and make all Tennesseans' lives better. And if we raise the boat for the least of ours, the entire boat raises at the same time. So I appreciate you again, and to my colleagues, and I appreciate y'all also. And this is a good report. And thankful to have it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Are there other questions are there other? Yes, Mayor Frank.
When I was looking over, I guess your first brief for us at the last meeting, one of the questions that I had, but I didn't really dive into, I know the focus of this study was not diving into the number or the statistical data on the number of minority business owners that would be eligible to even contract in the first place. And it would seem to me that might be an area where we as a state could do a little bit more in encouraging minorities to get involved and to start their own small businesses and those kind of things. You have disparity ratios in here, and then, so for instance, from that 2009 disparity study, it talks about the number of businesses that are available, and then it has that disparity ratio going down from each of those sectors. Can you talk a little bit more about that ratio? And it says number of businesses. Is that just strictly, are we looking at that in terms of population for the state of Tennessee, or is this just a number of businesses that are out there? Am I making sense on that?
Yeah, and it's fairly complicated when you read into the actual disparity studies, how they determine that what that availability number is. So let's say for construction category is one of the things that they calculate a ratio for. They go through all the state's construction contracts and look at where have all the bidders for those contracts come from. And so there's a geographic component that says, okay, we get, and you have to reach once you reach a certain threshold, that becomes your geographic market. So for construction, it's usually pretty local. So you get to a point where pretty much all the companies bidding on state construction contracts are either within Tennessee or like the neighboring states. So then they go through those lists of who has, how many companies have bid, who is all on the list, like who is registered, as a minority construction company, and then they looked at, several different sources of information to come up with what is that number. And so that's the level of analysis that, in the 2 years that they did that study back then, that we, unfortunately couldn't put together in the time we've had now, just based on, existing data that we could get readily available. So it's, it becomes a complex thing to figure out what is that available. And there's, when you read and kind of look at the literature discussing these disparity studies, there's sort of some controversy of, how you come up with that number affects the ratio, obviously. And is it, is it companies that are ready, willing, so there's, there's debate of how you come up with that number, but it's if you were to take a different category like good for goods, a limited maybe only half of the state's contract bids for certain goods come from within the state, so then the market can be the entire country in some cases, and so then you have a huge allegedly you would theoretically have a huge availability of potential companies out there that seem willing and able to do business to provide these goods. Hopefully that made sense.
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And at the last meeting, you did a great job of explaining this because, if I'm not mistaken, you have this pool, right? And then you have those either women-owned or minority-owned companies that may be in that pool. But if I'm not mistaken, there were some obstacles that precluded some of these women-owned and minority-owned companies from even being considered in that pool. Am I correct? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, there definitely, there can be. When you look at what the sources of data are, within a disparity study for what they go through to come up with that availability number. If it's primarily dealing with companies that have bid in the past or companies that are registered, with the state, diversity business enterprise, or with some other sort of a certification. If you're a company that hasn't reached that criteria yet, you might not be counted in that availability pool. Now, it's to the same extent, are you capable as a company then of bidding and performing on a contract of a certain size? If you haven't reached that level of capacity yet, you get this catch-22 of you can only do business if you've already done business. So your comment is correct that you have to get yourself to a point where you're on the list to be considered able to do those contracts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I did note that in your presentation, there was difficulty or barrier to comparing the 2009 disparity study to another disparity study that you would conduct. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's kind of what I was, to answer the mayor's question down here, that the level of time and detail that they went into for this full, the full disparity study that's been contracted and what other states do just kind of exceeded what we were able to do in the time we've had so far. Just that's about.
But I was reading that, correct me if I'm wrong, that part of the challenge was that we don't have some of the measures in place in some of our departments to provide the adequate data.
Yeah, there were some instances where some of the way the procurement and spending data with the suppliers is organized didn't necessarily line up with some of the ways that the Governor's Office of Diversity Business is either categorizing businesses or to try to we weren't able to break down some of the state's data into the same kind of categories of businesses that the disparity study had done. So just those are the kinds of things that we said that the state should look into doing more with lining those things up and getting a little better handle on that data to see the picture more clearly.
Okay. And so if the data is better, one might be able to better compare if any progress has been made in recruitment, removing of knowledge barriers, and other intentional efforts to to use my colleague's term, to lift specific boats so that all boats do rise, correct?
Yeah, I would agree with that. That's, what we wanted to say is that, if the previous study, gives these, these numbers, these ratios, a number we come up with isn't the same number based on the same stuff. So that's we don't want to make that direct comparison. We wanted to show where, using same data to same data, some things have improved, and point out, just looking at the current situation, what might have room for improvement.
Okay. And I just simply want to borrow, if I can, from a example that was used earlier with infrastructure. Surely, Blue Oval project is going to bring a lot of business to the state, a lot of contract opportunities. I would hope that as we talk about that in infrastructure, we also talk about how there can be some intentionality in making sure that those communities that do have these other barriers are included, so that we don't look back and say 10 years from now, after the facility is built, wish we had had more information to be intentional to include African American businesses into that. Thank you.
Representative Williams.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for the study. I two questions. One, did you look at, as somebody who is in the construction business, which you referenced earlier, there's some trepidation to doing business with the state. Do you take any consideration, regardless of minority business or other, do you take any consideration, any comparison between the two, saying that some minority businesses may not want to do business with the state, and the variant between the two? I had an opportunity to tour the new National Soccer Club stadium the other day. Private sector set an unbelievable goal as it related to minority-owned business participation, and doubled it. But it was the intent of the owner to make sure that he did do that. Ford can set the same standard, or the owner. I guess the question is did you notice in the study, did minority businesses not want to do business with the state, similar to maybe like my business?
Yeah, that the hesitation or difficulty or perceived, hurdles to become a state contractor go across all different, all groups. It's something we've heard, and that's one of the things that I think, recommendations for things that can be done, that are not specifically targeted at minority or certain African American owned businesses, but to make it easier for anyone trying to grow a business up to the point where you can go after these state contracts. It helps. It helps all the groups involved. So yeah.
Finally, in the study, did you compare? I think you said this earlier, and I didn't know if you could tell me. Did you compare us as it relates to participation in state contracts, and what percentage we compare to maybe states that surround us, or no? We
actually couldn't. It was another one of those situations where the apples to apples was hard to come by. Actually, we were doing better as far as public data that was available. We did we had a hard time trying to get some of the other states to get numbers that made sense to compare and say, well, we're at 3%, you're at 2%, or you're at 8%. Really couldn't kind of do that with any sort of fairness.
Are there other questions, members? Other questions? Senator Robinson. And I failed to mention a moment ago that we have some folks who are participating by telephone today, and from time to time they have a hard time hearing the questions, so just keep that in mind as you ask your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of quick questions. In reviewing the status of the recommendations from the 2009 Disparity Study, some of the recommendations, of course, are high level. One of them being adjust current legislation to clearly define the means for tracking the attainment of agency goals. Would that have been the recommendation that would ask that the state departments would put together some type of plan so there could be some uniformity and parity in the data that they put out as far as their procurement processes? So that we could have accurate data?
Which one are we looking at there? I want to look at the...
Well, I'm on page 10, and this is the 5th out of 7 that were policy,
yeah.
race, and gender conscious. page 10.
Yeah, I think I'd have to look at what the 2009 study had beyond that. I'm looking at our summary of it. I believe that was whether it would, those goals would be at the minority group level. I'd have to go back to the 2009, to the full study to see what specifically that one was talking about.
Okay, and my other question is, from my understanding, a business cannot certify to be an African American owned business, but only a minority owned business. Is that correct?
You're certified as a minority owned business. They do, the governor's office has kept track of spending further by minority group, whether African American, Hispanic, Asian, Native American, I think, are the ethnic groups that are within that. So they can look at that. They just don't have, you can't get to that level as far as setting goals or certain things, but spending, the spending data specifically for African Americans is just African American, where we've shown that, and not just all minority.
I'm concerned because in the report it says that the businesses that are certified as African American owned, we spend approximately 3.3% with them. So when we say the businesses that are certified, is that a misnomer?
It would be certified minority businesses that are owned by African Americans.
And how are they identified?
It's through combination of self-identifying and then follow-up. The governor's office does, someone sends an application to get certified, they're going to talk to those and find out, and do due diligence to actually, figure out who it is that they're talking to. And they talked about, whether, they say in their reports of, if it's an African American and a woman-owned business, you only get to be in, under the minority category or the woman-owned category, and often that can depend on the type of what might be most beneficial to you as a business person for what you choose to fall under.
And currently, are there any goals set for spending?
Each agency has.
At the state level?
There is not a statewide percentage goal. Okay. They're agency level.
I guess my reservation with that is if there aren't any state goals, then what is the hook for the departments to be compliant with what we're asking them to implement? If we have 30 departments and only 5 of them even implemented some of the programs, how can we incentivize them to be compliant if there's no state goal set?
I think that's a good question. It's something we talk, that the 2009 study had said that they're being tying achieving your goals to performance
metrics
records as something that they would, that's been recommended, and it was not implemented.
Right.
So, in the way the law is written, they're aspirational goals that agencies strive to obtain bids from the minority-owned companies. It's all aspirational.
Thank you.
Any implementation of the recommendations from that 2009 report, would the impetus on that come from the board that governs the procurement office? There is a separate board that governs the central procurement office, or would that have to come through a legislative agency?
So most of it did not require legislative changes, and most of it the recommendations were policy type of recommendations.
So I'm not trying to lead you. Well, I guess I am leading you a little bit. But so if someone wanted to pursue this, and perhaps start with the board, the Central Procurement Office Board?
Yeah. It depends on what your goal is, what you're trying to get changed, whether it should be done through policy or would require some sort of legislative action.
Thank you. Do we have other questions? We have other questions for the presenter. All right. There being none, then I think that we're ready to vote to approve this report on state contracting and African American owned businesses. We'll do it on a voice vote. I have a motion from the Vice Chairman to approve the report and a second from Representative Williams. There further questions or debate? There being none, those in favor of the motion to approve say aye. And those opposed say nay. There being no nay, it passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Members, let's look at tab 6 as we work our way through the afternoon agenda. House Bill 366 and Senate Bill 1604, right-of-way dedications. It's a draft report for review and comment, and I will refer to Mr. Michael Mount, who is our research manager, to present the report. You're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Chairman. Commissioners, my name is Michael Mount, and I'll be presenting the Commission's draft report on right-of-way dedications for your review and comment. It was prepared in response to a request by the Lieutenant Governor and House Speaker that the Commission study Senate Bill 1604 by Senator Bailey, House Bill 366 by Representative Williams, which would prohibit local governments from requiring a property owner to dedicate land along an existing public right-of-way as a condition of approving any application made to develop the property. Local governments commonly condition subdivision approval on these dedications and typically do not pay for them. The Tennessee Association of Professional Surveyors raised concerns that requiring owners to dedicate land along existing right-of-ways, public right-of-ways, without compensation is unconstitutional. But as was presented by my colleague Leah Eldridge at the December 2021 Commission meeting, the U.S. Supreme Court has ruled that dedications that are required as a condition of local government permit approval are constitutional if they pass the Nolan-Dolan test, a two-pronged test that was developed in two cases, Nolan v. California Coastal Commission and Dolan v. City of Tigard. In Nolan, the court held that there must be an essential nexus connecting whatever condition the local government imposed on the property owner and a valid governmental purpose. In the case, the California Coastal Commission was requiring an easement for public beach access before they would permit the Nolans to tear down their beachfront home and build a larger one in its place. However, the court ruled that in favor of the Nolans and determined that the easement was not sufficiently connected to a governmental purpose. In Dolan, the court held that there must not only be a nexus between the effect of the development and the required dedication, but that there also should be a rough proportionality between the two. In that case, the city of Tigard was requiring Dolan to dedicate a strip of land beside her expanded store to be used for a pedestrian and bike path to help offset the anticipated increase in vehicle traffic to the store. But the court ruled in favor of Dolan, saying that although there was an essential nexus between an expanded store and increased traffic, the amount of land being required in that case was likely in excess of that impact. In addition to saying that requiring owners to dedicate land along existing right-of-ways without compensation is unconstitutional, the proponents of the bill question why local governments don't pay for dedications like the Tennessee Department of Transportation, which pays for right-of-ways when that it acquires. But unlike TDOT, local governments are engaging in land use regulation when they require property owners to dedicate property as a condition of subdivision approval. And local governments use dedicated properties for purposes other than road widening, such as building or maintaining utility lines and drainage ditches that may be needed to meet infrastructure needs caused by the new development. And new developments can and often do add to communities' infrastructure needs and costs. Although the bill would benefit property owners, it would shift more of those costs of the development to other taxpayers. By dedicating a segment of property, the property owner bears some of the costs of the new infrastructure construction or improvements created by the change in how the property is used, and the total cost does not have to be borne by the community as a whole. According to a representative of the Tennessee Municipal League at the September 2021 Commission meeting, dedications reduce the cost to be borne by taxpayers associated with the construction of improvements that are necessary to mitigate the effects of development. The stakeholders who brought the bill added that their primary concern was not the larger real estate developments, but small property owners, and that they had entertained the option of limiting the bill's effects only to such smaller subdivisions while leaving dedications in place for larger developments. But stakeholders don't necessarily agree on what that threshold should be, and opponents of the bill had not accepted this as a compromise. Because there's no agreed-upon criteria that would determine such a threshold, representatives for local officials said that such a threshold would likely be arbitrary. In its current form, the bill would prohibit governmental entities from requiring dedications on any property, regardless of its size or intended use. And currently, only one state, Massachusetts, has a statute that prohibits local government from conditioning approval of new subdivisions on dedications of land without compensating the property owners. A few other states have restricted dedications in certain circumstances, such as subdivisions of farmland, subdivisions containing fewer than a specified number of lots or parcels, and based on the gross area of the proposed subdivision, regardless of whether the dedications would pass the Nolan-Dolan test. But Tennessee has a longstanding tradition of local control regarding land use regulation, which allows local communities to manage land development in ways that meet their needs. Because courts have found dedications that meet the Nolan-Dolan test are a constitutional means for governments to regulate land use, because new developments can and often do add to a community's infrastructure needs and costs, because dedications can help offset those costs so that they don't fall solely on the entire community's taxpayers, and because of Tennessee's longstanding tradition of local control over land use regulation, the draft report does not recommend the proposed legislation. Some states have laws to protect property owners' rights while maintaining local authority to require dedications. 5 states, Arizona, Colorado, Florida, Minnesota, and Utah, have incorporated the language of the Nolan-Dolan test into state statute, which provides guidance to local governments to help ensure that those dedications meet the Nolan-Dolan test. Although Texas does not include the essential nexus language from the test, it does specify that dedication should be roughly proportional to the cost of the development. Additionally, some states go further and require local governments to provide a written analysis justifying required dedications. Based on the actions of other states to protect property owners' rights while maintaining local authority to require dedications and to provide guidance to local governments, the draft report finds that the General Assembly should codify in state law the Nolan-Dolan test, the constitutionally based standard that has been established and applied by the U.S. Supreme Court. And with that, I would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. I want to thank the commission staff for their hard work. Obviously, this is something that originated in my district, and something that's happened to me personally. I think it's important, the work that you're doing. I guess one of the questions I had would, based upon your findings, would because Tennessee hasn't adopted the Nolan-Dolan test, would that mean that all the right-of-way acquisition prior to us adopting Nolan-Dolan would be unconstitutional?
I'm not exactly sure what you mean by adopted Nolan-Dolan test. It was a test developed by the U.S. Supreme Court. So in a sense, it's a standard that would be applied in any lawsuits regarding dedications, so including ones in Tennessee.
Okay, maybe I should ask it another way. In your report, your draft report, I noticed that it said that the Constitution, that these 5 states use the Nolan-Dolan test to insulate or protect or ensure their right-of-way from the meeting, enabling them to meet the constitutionality of property owners' rights. I guess the question, to rephrase the question, was if the state of Tennessee does not adopt by legislative means based upon your recommendation, could the right-of-way process deem future right-of-way takes as unconstitutional using your draft report as the basis?
I'm still not exactly sure. As you said, Tennessee has not. Oh, I'm sorry.
And I think the confusion revolves around what these other 5 states have done that Tennessee hasn't done and what we're recommending that Tennessee does. The Nolan-Dolan test it is what's used. These other states are just more intentional in setting out in their statute, so there's less confusion on people when they're requiring dedication, so that everyone is aware of what the requirements are, so that it's less likely to be unconstitutional takings.
That's why he has a PhD. So another question that I had for you as it relates to this process, if local communities, and you may not have researched this, and I recognize, if local communities can require developers or farmland owners in a process of subdividing 100 acres into 2 lots, if they can require additional right-of-way take and not pay the potential landowners for that right-of-way, do those same municipalities, cities, counties, have the ability to charge for abandoned right-of-way in order to give it away? Or in order to transfer ownership of right-of-way to another individual?
Yeah, you're right that our report is not focused on abandoned right-of-way, but I believe a similar topic was discussed at our September commission meeting, and if I remember correctly, I think the point was that they very well could charge for that land in that case. So,
under the basis of taking it for free, but not giving it, but not making investment in the property and then charging to get it back. So for instance, if Chair Lady Hazelwood wanted to subdivide her home property into 2 parcels, she gave the right-of-way in order to do that, in order to subdivide it into 2 parcels, and then later changed her mind and did a 2-lot combination plat back to it. The local municipality in Signal Mountain could charge her for that additional right-of-way to take it back from her after she just gave it to her. Is that correct?
I mean, it would depend. I think
I guess the reason for the question is if we can take right-of-way without paying for it, right? In the example that I gave, that and we're going to set that as the standard based upon your draft report, and I'm actually fine with that. Then we shouldn't charge to give it back. That's my point. You can't. It seems unconstitutional to have it both ways. And maybe I'm missing something, which is why I'm asking the question.
Just from a practical standpoint, I know in Sevier County when a situation like this arises and there is an abandoned right-of-way, we normally just divide that right-of-way between the two property owners and don't sell it back to them. I mean, we don't, we divide the right-of-way. If it's a road that's abandoned or whatever that abandoned right-of-way is, we'll just divide it between the two property owners, or ever how many property owners are involved, and quit claim that right-of-way back to them and without any compensation. I'm not saying that you couldn't have compensation. I'm just saying from a practical manner, that's the way that we handle it.
Thank you. That's why you have so many people flocking to Sevier County, Mayor. But the reason for the question is there isn't uniformity across the state. I've been charged for abandoned right-of-way in my own community, and but then taken right-of-way in my own community. So it can't go both ways. And so even though that is standard operating procedure, it's not codified either way, Mayor Waters, and I think it's important that we do codify at least something so we're not finding ourselves in court every time somebody argues, well, I should be given my half of that abandoned right-of-way and my neighbor get the other half of that abandoned right-of-way, because cities, counties across the state are not like Sevier County, and they are charging people for land that they should give them. Thank you.
I just want to be clear, so we're saying we're not recommending this proposed legislation, but we should codify that particular test, and then the legislature could be free to do things such as Texas or something else that could still maintain local control, but yet also protect the citizens from, I guess, overreach or still protect their rights. Am I understanding our recommendation correctly that is before us?
Yeah, I think that's right. The sense of the reason for codifying is basically to put local governments on notice of a standard that really already exists, but would only come up if there were a lawsuit.
And that would help educate
I believe so,
property owners as well, that this is the standard, and if the legislature wanted to do something further, like give instructions or a process, or Tennessee wanted to give a guidance to local government, they could go that next step.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Thank you.
Other questions? One more.
Sorry, I've been here all week, been away from my family. I might as well ask all my questions. I recognize in the discussion with TDOT pays for all the right-of-way that they do as it relates to road. Did your study bifurcate the difference between roadways for local municipalities, road superintendents, city planners, the difference between those and that of TDOT? TDOT says that, they don't do all the other esoteric things that cities and communities do, but cities and communities do operate like TDOT, so in that they maintain roads and build roads and those kinds of things. Was there any look between the two, whether the rules apply for planning as it relates to expansion of roads versus and comparatively the way TDOT does it? Because TDOT, well, they pay right away based on slope easements, erosion control measures that are necessary, retention ponds, and those kinds of things, which are not technically road. I would say they were more infrastructure.
Yeah, we did look into that. We talked to Representative TDOT about their process, and how he explained it to us was that they're always going to acquire the right-of-way in fee simple, that it is always going to be connected to a project that TDOT is active on in that area, and that being different from a local government that might be acquiring right-of-way with no intention of expanding the road at that time. In fact, they may never expand the road. And the other difference being that whereas TDOT, it's always going to be in fee simple, and they explain that it's to comply with federal law, whereas in a lot of cases, the dedication that a local government requires is an easement. It's not necessarily in fee simple.
Well, right-of-way isn't simply an easement, so a right-of-way is, in fact, a right-of-way. I do think that one last question, when the state legislature changed the means by which we can rezone property or annex property into communities, and a part of that process, there's something called a plan of services. I think one of the concerns that my constituents had is that a commitment to a plan of services is important as it relates to planning, but in the planning of roads, it is as well. And a lot of times, right-of-way is dedicated because there's an expectation that this road will be widened in the future, and so we need additional right-of-way. Have any other states required that improvement or widening of the road of which this municipality is taking that additional right-of-way, if they have to do that road improvement within a certain period of time, much like we would do for a plan of services, or does that not happen? Because in some instances, there's been right-of-way taken in my community that have supposed to be a widened project, and it's 30 years later and still no plan to build the road.
No, we didn't do a review of other states on that topic. So,
Other questions?
Thank you, Chairman.
No vote is being taken today on it. Thank you very much. If there be no other questions, and I believe, let's see, that takes us to the end of the calendar. This takes us to the end of today's calendar. We will meet again in the morning, beginning at 8:30 a.m. promptly. For Now, I'm not going to call names, but the initials are LW. Okay. We will meet again, and we will stand in adjournment until 8:30 a.m. in the morning. And thank you very much for your attendance today and your questions and comments.
Members, you can leave your material here for tomorrow's meeting.